On paper, the Falcon 2 Pro from Creality is a feature-rich, high-powered laser engraver from a trusted brand. But have Creality overcomplicated things with all of the bells and whistles, or is this the reliable workhorse you need in your workshop? In this video, we're going to find out. This video is sponsored by PCBWay. We're going to be doing things a little bit differently today, and instead of me doing all the testing, I've handed this machine over to a friend of mine who's been putting it through its paces to see if it delivers on everything you'd expect from a big brand. Nigel has owned a CO2 laser for years, which unfortunately has now died, but his experience means that he brings a different perspective to myself, as I've only ever used diode lasers. The only one thing he's asked me not to talk about is how his CO2 laser died. So Nigel, how did you kill your CO2 laser?
Rest in peace, that CO2 laser. I'll talk about that later, Ricky, but rest in peace. That was an expensive error on my side.
So the Falcon 2 Pro, how did you find it?
Overall build quality is very good, but it doesn't come without any hiccups when you're setting it up. And we can talk a bit about that later.
Now, we must just say that Creality sent us this engraver, we didn't buy it, but we will try our best to be unbiased and all views and opinions are our own. If you decide by the end of the video that you might want to buy one of these for yourself, then check out the links in the description below where you'll find the best possible prices. So first things first, let's get some of the boring things out of the way. What was it like to unbox and set up and all that kind of stuff?
I mean, before we get on the unboxing, I mean, I've had 3D printers, lasers, engravers. This is sexy looking. I mean, when you actually get it out of the box, I mean, it is extremely functional, extremely good looking. This will look great in my garage. What I do like, first impressions, I mean, the actual material is like a brushed aluminium, I guess. I mean, the build quality, you can tell when you're actually putting it together using the instruction manual. I mean, everything is fairly solid. This is a little bit on the flimsy side, but it's super functional. And I just like, I mean, everything has its place. Even down to the emergency stop button, to where you plumb in the air, just to the tray that you move in and out to get your waste out, to the actual setting the height of the laser diode. Everything is extremely convenient. It's been designed just so it's just a workhorse.
And what about the manual? Was it good?
The manual was fair. I mean, probably an online one would be better, and I'm sure there is one. The one they supply, it's a step-by-step. It gets you through. There's no major issues. I mean, I'm not really a manual sort of guy. The only thing I think I need some bifocals to read some of this writing. So for us older generation, maybe some large text versions would be quite good.
Oh, wow, yeah.
It's probably fine for you.
Well, I need glasses now. I saw it's quite comprehensive though. A lot of these diode lasers, sometimes you get kind of 2 pages of setup. So it seems that Creality have improved their manuals. I remember my Ender 3 version 2 came with very little in the way of a manual, which is why I started making videos about it in the first place.
Yes.
Now these Perspex panels, I've seen a few people have had problems sliding them into the rails. Was that a problem or?
It is fiddly. I thought when it was a bit fiddly putting in, and I thought, okay, this is not going to last. But actually, once you've actually got it sort of twisted round and you sort of navigated it in, I mean, I've had this probably open and close 50 times, no problem. Again, it feels solid. The sides are much harder. Top is a little bit thinner, so you get the movement. But it's extremely convenient, and it's laser safe also as well. So that's fantastic. You got some safety features.
Yeah, and that's one thing I was going to ask about is Creality pitch this engraver as being a safe laser engraver. Now, I don't think that any laser engraver will ever be 100% safe. However, there are some safety features on here, aren't there, that make this a lot safer than your average diode laser engraver. What are they?
I mean, firstly, it's got a fire protection. There was a couple of instances where it did stop and there wasn't technically a fire.
So how does that work? So does so it's when there's a flame that it stops?
It's magic.
Or is it's magic?
There's a light that says fire. If there's a fire, it stops.
I guess that's all we need to know, really. Okay, so you think that works quite well then? You have actually had it stop on you.
Well, I mean, it stopped. It did stop a couple of times when it was slightly inconvenient, when there wasn't like technically a fire, but there was maybe too much smoke, or maybe there was a small ember there. So,
Okay, so it might be a little bit sensitive.
it could be a little bit sensitive, but better be on the safe side.
Of course.
I had a fire in my CO2 laser, which was kept under the hood. But still, if you're using the wrong materials, or you're using flammable materials, you're using wood, plastics, maybe paper, card, you're firing a laser, which is effectively heating up the surface, you're cutting it, you're etching it. You shouldn't be leaving it alone, but you feel a lot safer leaving this alone, knowing that it will completely cut itself off if it detects a flame.
Okay. And also, I'm assuming with the lights I've seen on here, the lights come on when you close the door. Does that mean that you can't run the laser with the door open?
Yes, it's got. So as soon as you lift this up, the lasing stops. You've got a key. You've got a safety switch. It's as safe, I would say, as you can get on a laser-based etching or cutting system.
Excellent. So I have seen this is classed as a Class 1 laser device. Now, that doesn't mean that the laser is safe to look at. I believe that it's a Class 4 laser with the lid open, but the safety features make it a Class 1 laser when you use all of the safety features and you don't bypass the safety features, which obviously you shouldn't do. If you're debating whether to buy a desktop laser engraver like the Falcon 2 Pro, or go all out on a CO2 machine, just in case you sometimes want to cut something a bit bigger, don't forget that laser cutting is one of the many manufacturing services now on offer from our video sponsor, PCBWay. Have a quick look at their website and you'll see that PCBWay have a surprising number of manufacturing services on offer, from the obvious PCB manufacture through to CNC machining, injection molding, 3D printing, and laser cutting. So if you need something fabricating, cutting, machining or printing, check them out from the links in the description and get a $5 discount on your first order. Now let's get back to the Falcon 2 Pro. So once it was all together, what was there to do before you could run your first job, for instance?
I mean, what is fairly convenient? I mean, probably slightly inconvenient, you got the air system that's outside. I have it also the same on the CO2 laser. They probably do it maybe because of vibration, because when you want to etch or when you want to lase very fine details, the last thing you want is a vibrating air supply vibrating the table. But what is convenient is you've got a location on the side which basically pipes the air, feeds it down the laser tube, keeps the actual material a bit cooler, and also blows away any debris. I mean, that's the main purpose of the air. You have exactly the same thing on a CO2 laser also as well. But the convenience is there's a plug on the side, you pipe the air in on that side, so it's powered from the machine. It's not a separate power supply, which you have with other systems. Mm-hmm. So add in the air, extremely convenient.
So because it's plugged in to the laser, does the laser control the pump turning on and off?
Yes.
So that is a great feature actually, because there are other engravers that I've got where it's purely controlled by a manual switch, which is a pain because you either forget to turn it on when your job runs, or you don't turn it off afterwards and you've got a lot of noise going on all the time.
And it's even, let's say, smarter in that aspect, because when you actually read the manual, they say when you're cutting, you need a lot more air. When you're etching, you need a little bit less air.
And how is that adjusted? Is that
it's actually set up. It's all automatic. So you plug it in and you can manually do it. But when you're using light burn, if you're cutting or if you're engraving, it will automatically adjust the airflow.
Okay, that is good.
So there's some sort of two-way communication going on there, which is great. Again, convenient, easy to set up, and the less things I have to worry about, not only ensuring like the quality of the piece I'm engraving or cutting, but also the safety. If there's a certain aspect of the air that's for the safety to keep the wood or material cooler, even better. Then I can just focus on what I need to do.
Okay, so it seems pretty good on the hardware side of things. So what about software?
I use Lightburn. So Lightburn I already pay for. So Creality didn't seem to have their own software to run it. So you need to use something that's on the web or you already have.
Yeah, so there are free versions of software, but generally with laser engravers, the overall software that everybody uses is Lightburn, but Lightburn has a cost, and I think it's around £50 a year, I think, from memory.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know, maybe $80, $90.
I mean, Lightburn was fairly okay to set up. I think one of the problems is, I don't know if it's a Creality, a Lightburn or a Mac. I had issues getting the Mac connecting and communicating with the Creality laser. It took a little bit of time. I needed to download a particular driver that communicates with the system. It took some hours. In the end, it ran. So I suspect it was more on the Mac side, because when I went through Google for solutions, there were other problems with Lightburn, Mac, Creality. In the end, I downloaded the driver, got it running, started communicating, haven't had any issues since. But working with a PC, I tested it with a Windows, worked absolutely no problem. I think it's just a driver issue, but just be ready to manage that.
So connectivity. So I was surprised to see that this particular engraver doesn't have Wi-Fi. Now, did you find that an issue at all? Because I think that would frustrate me a little bit just because of my particular setup.
I'd say, I mean, to connect it, you need two USB cables, which is a little bit frustrating. You've got one which is controlling the system and one which is taking the image for the camera. So you have to pipe in two USBs, and then, of course, in Lightburn, it's got a built-in camera on top to see your workpiece and to manage the alignment process, and then you've got the communication port connecting with the laser itself.
Right, so is that two USB cables going from the engraver to your laptop or PC?
Yes. Now the Wi-Fi, I don't mind not having the Wi-Fi. I actually prefer not having that hassle. I have it in the workshop. I have a PC there all the time. It's always connected. I'm not going to be remotely logging in. I'm not sharing it with other project users. It's in the workshop. It's always connected. I don't need Wi-Fi. It's one less thing to worry about.
I guess my perspective is more from having a lot more experience with 3D printers, and a 3D print could be 8 hours long, and you might not want your computer sitting next to it for the whole time. You know, you're going to leave it running and not be in the same room as it. Whereas I guess with an engraver, that's not something you should be doing. So it's probably an added safety feature, the fact that you're always connected physically to your engraver.
One issue I did have was the power supply blew up in the first 10 minutes of using it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it just went pop, all the power went, blew all the fuses on the house, which is not a big issue, just reset the fuse, but was slightly inconvenient in that sense.
Okay, so did Creality replace that?
No problem. Connected with them, replaced the power supply straight away. So thank you, Creality, for that. It's much appreciated. So I would say that that was a good test of their support.
Of course. Yeah.
You expect it with them. We tested it, and they delivered. So you can't ask more than that.
Okay, so when you say, so it blew up, so it just failed, but there was, I mean, was there no fire or anything?
There was no fire. It went pop, which was a little bit of a shame to see that, but they delivered a new power supply. It works absolutely fine now. Okay,
so maybe just some early model reliability issues.
Could well be.
So you mentioned there the camera. So am I right in thinking, so if I was running a 3D printer, I'd want the camera to watch the job while I'm not there. However, that's not the use of this camera, is it?
No, I mean, normally when you have a camera, certainly on like CNC machines, laser engravers and things like that, so the camera sits right above the workpiece, and the aim there is that if you use Lightburn, for example, the camera's looking at your workpiece, and you use this as a calibration tool effectively. So when you see your workpiece, if you have a piece on there, you have a drawing or an outline of something you actually want to engrave or cut out, you can actually use the image from the camera, embed that into the Lightburn software, and then you can draw an outline on that image that you're actually seeing.
So it's more for lining jobs up than it is for watching them run, for instance.
Yes.
Okay, so was there any kind of calibration or anything you had to do with that? How was that?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think the same with most engravers and laser cutters, whether it's CO2 or diode, it doesn't actually matter. You have to have a calibration, and mostly that's because the camera they use in there, it's a sort of fisheye, so it, spatially it changes towards the edges. So they do actually provide this calibration print. Now, I was too hasty. There is a calibration print that is on Lightburn. I downloaded it, I used that one, but when I actually rummaged into the box itself, they provided one.
Okay.
And as I'm using this, I'm putting it into the corners. It's a little bit dim in there. What I should have done is actually turned it over. There's some great instructions on the back that say make sure you do it in when there's good light. Make sure you put a piece of wood behind it to create some nice contrast for the camera.
Yeah.
So there's a few tips and tricks. So take your time, unlike myself, read the instructions, and the better the alignment, the more precise you're going to get when you start to outline quite precise corners or areas where you want to cut holes and things like this, because the closer the alignment, just the more precise, the better set up. I would say it probably takes 20 minutes roughly to do the alignment process.
Yeah, so it sounds like quite a long time, but then once that's done,
it's done.
And from then on you can use the camera image. So I guess you then have that image up on your computer or laptop screen, and then you can move your next job into place, your next workpiece, and you know that it's going to be lined up. Now, I have actually used something similar myself, but the camera was movable, which completely ruins your calibration, any type of vibration. So the camera here is fixed into the top of the frame. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so you know it's going to be the same every time.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what this extra USB is for on the side there. So the calibration does exactly what it says it should do. It allows you to spatially move your component. And what's quite convenient, but this is more of a Lightburn thing, is when you put a new piece in and you've got a new product or a new outline of something that you want to do, you just refresh the camera image, it overlays it onto your work area, and then you're sort of working with a fresh outlook.
Okay, great. So it's a good feature that works well.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's quite essential almost nowadays for any sort of laser cutting or...
Because it's not very common, actually, on a lot of other... Because it's not a feature that I've ever had on a laser engraver, other than it being an add-on unit. So it's great to see that included on this.
On my CO2 laser, which we'll come to talk about in a minute, that doesn't have that. So I had to add a camera myself and then go through that calibration process. And that makes it even trickier because on the CO2 laser, you've got a big hood that you have to open and close, or certainly on the one I use. And then you never quite get a perfect alignment every time. There's always a slight movement.
Oh, okay, so it can move. So the way even more so then. So the way Creality have designed this, the camera in here is very solid on a frame and there's no movement.
Yeah, it works well, it does exactly what it should do.
Excellent. So what about the outlet? I see that there's a fan outlet, so that's actually, I can see there's a fan in there.
It's already built in. When you build it, you have to feed the wire, but the fan is already embedded into the actual perspex. So extremely convenient. Just got to find the right connection where the fan clips into, but that's always automatic. And like with any cutting or engraving, you're heating the surface, so you're going to get smoke, and it just pumps it outside.
It seems unbelievable to me that just a couple of years ago, and even now, you can, but the cheap diode laser engravers you can buy now don't come with an enclosure. There's no kind of extraction.
Yes.
So people are, burning, exactly as I did with my first ever one. You're burning materials in a room and breathing that in.
Yeah.
Now, of course, that's another safety feature that Creality have added here, which, in my opinion, all laser engravers should now come with, is some sort of collection and extraction of any fumes.
Yeah, and I can understand when you're like a DIY enthusiast, you're like, okay, I'll put an enclosure around it. I can put a vent on the back. I can vent it out. That's great. But as you sort of develop with laser engravers and you go from that first phase, that early model, and now you actually, maybe if you're looking for something a little bit more advanced, a little bit more of a workhorse for your workshop, then it's got it all there. You can actually just start to do what you bought it for, and that was, project work.
Yeah, and even down to the fact that it's not just an outlet, there's a fan.
Yes.
And so you only have to, I guess, connect a hose, put it out of a window.
That's it.
And that's the basics done then. And does it come with a hose? I assume it comes with a hose.
A small hose, assuming that you've got it, pushed right up to the back wall.
Okay.
But I mean, it's a standard sizing.
Okay, so you can just buy another hose.
You can just buy another hose, pump it out, and it'll be fine.
Okay. So bed size compared to the CO2 laser is huge, isn't it?
Yes.
But bed size, how much smaller is this than a CO2 laser?
Well, I mean, with CO2 lasers, you get probably the same with laser diodes. I mean, it can, as long as you've got an axis that can traverse X and Y, then you could pretty much go any size.
Make it as big as you like.
So it doesn't really matter, laser diode. I'd say from a mechanical setup, let's talk about CO2s. CO2, it's a laser. It lasers from a tube that sits in the back. It exits the laser itself, and then it's optically bouncing off mirrors to come to the sort of a mirror in the center here that then focuses it down onto your target.
Okay, so and the alternative with the diode laser, the laser unit itself is what you're moving around above the workpiece.
It's all embedded because the laser diode, I mean, this is a blue laser, so it's fairly small, compact. The only downside is probably if you really compare, diode lasers are typically less powerful.
Now this is the 40 watt version. Creality make I believe a 22 watt and now a 60 watt version of this same unit. So how did the 40 watt compare to your 100 watt CO2 laser? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, when you really compare, I mean, the main things is that you're always better cut thicker materials with the CO2. If you really if you go to the highest power of the laser diode, that's practical for DIY enthusiasts compared to what you get on a CO2 laser. You always better be able to cut thicker materials. The thing is that, is it worth that extra mechanical setup? Because certainly with the mechanical setup, what I found, if I move it or I open the lid, or you get a slightly misalignment on the CO2 laser, and therefore then you lose efficiency because it's not perfectly focused.
So because you've got, say, 3 mirrors, it's easy for one of those mirrors to go out very slightly.
Absolutely. Now, it's not super difficult to adjust. It's just extra time.
Extra complications.
It's extra complications. I mean, if it's a completely rock solid setup, maybe you're fine. But by the time you open the lid, you put things in, you knock the axis and things like this, it only needs to be slightly out, and then you realize that where you're moving the laser around, it's focused in some areas and less in others. So you end up, I've had experience with CO2 where it cuts perfectly in one corner and then it's slightly out of focus in the other corner.
Oh, really?
Because the mirrors have just ever so knocked by a few microns.
Okay. So all because of the mechanical setup.
You've got the whole mechanical setup to take into account.
Which of course just doesn't happen with diode lasers because it's...
You're moving the power source effectively. So from that perspective, it's much more convenient. I would say what I've found with using this setup, I was quite surprised with what I could cut.
Okay.
And I would say that where the CO2 comes into itself, where you can cut much thicker materials, you can cut acrylic. So diode lasers tend to not work so well if it's highly reflective or transparent, because the laser has to absorb into that material.
Well, it's light, isn't it?
It's light.
And if you've got a clear material, the light passes straight through it and doesn't cut it. It doesn't create any heat.
Yeah. So with the CO2 laser, cutting things like thicker materials, like even 8-9 mil ply, just with the CO2. The thing is that if you don't have the overall power, you can just actually go over the cut.
You can do multiple passes.
You can do multiple passes. So unless you're really trying to run things on a production line, where this might struggle if you were to do a direct comparison to a CO2, you just cut it multiple times. Maybe it takes you twice as long or 3 times longer, with a diode laser. But if you're, a hobby enthusiast and you're not trying to run a production line, it outweighs the downsides of not having like for like power comparison.
Yeah, and that's something I was really interested to get your perspective on that, because you hadn't used diode lasers before. And I think the general, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the general impression of a lot of people who use CO2 lasers, they think that diode lasers are a long way behind. But there are some benefits to these diode lasers, aren't there?
I mean, there's the benefits of the actual mechanics and practical side of it, but I wasn't put off what, let's say, the power limitations, what you get on a laser diode. I cut up to 7-8 mil plywood without any issues. I think that, I mean, like with any laser cutters, laser engravers, things like this, if we're really talking cutting capability, I think that no one really states what they can and cannot do. And I think a lot of that is you can pass through something 50 times and cut through it. But actually, if you actually look at it, on the base, you'd have, be quite charred maybe, where it's gone out of focus and you're just obliterating it until it makes the cut. 7 mil cuts in ply or MDF cut very well. Geometrically, it was quite good front and back end without too much charring, let's say. Pretty efficient about doing that, and that's all I need it for in that if I'm making templates for things like this.
So maybe it will do the thicker woods when they're very light woods. However, you're more everyday harder woods and plywoods, then you're going to be looking at a thinner cut.
Yeah, and actually one of the projects I used it for was to put an oak inlay into, a sprayed MDF, template, and 7 mil oak, 7 mil MDF, no problem.
Yeah.
So it did that well with very good accuracy. So for that, pleased. That's all I use the CO2 for, anyhow. So it's very comparable.
So it seems that this is a good kind of all-in-one package, pretty self-contained.
Sure.
Whereas the CO2 laser, I remember you telling me stories of setting up separate water butts and cutting holes in your wall. How do the setups compare?
So with a CO2 laser, it gets hot, so you need to chill it. So you can either use, which I use now or used to use, is a water chiller. But when I first had the laser, I had an intricate pumping system. You have to use. I mean, in both systems, you have to use deionized water, for various reasons. Where I went wrong is the safety switch stopped working. I might have bypassed it because it was causing me a few problems. It didn't cool the laser and the laser overheated, and then that's an expensive fix.
So when you say expensive, I mean, it's kind of almost the cost of buying a new one, isn't it?
It's, let's say, £600-700 for a new laser. So it's a significant issue if you don't chill the laser. If you use a water chiller and you use all the correct safety precautions and things like this, it works fine. But it is an extra cost. It's extra mechanics. You have to have the water, pumping around the system. It's not too bad, but when you compare it to a laser diode, of course, this is much more convenient. You don't have the cooling. It's self-contained, and it just does it.
Everything comes in one box as well.
It's there, absolutely, yeah.
And you're cutting your first job on day one.
Absolutely, straight out the box.
Yeah. So I noticed that this engraver comes with 2 laser modules. Is that right?
That's right. So this is 40 watt. So this is the main laser I would use for cutting, even for engraving letters, names. The 40 watt, it's not actually a circle, it's actually almost like a square. It's like 80 micron by around 120 micron. And I think they use some sort of array, or they stack it to get the intensity, fairly even across that area. So, I mean, because of the size, I mean, I did some engraving, it looked pretty good. This is only 1.6 watts, so it's better for delicate materials, but the spot size is only 60 micron and it's actually a circle. So it's a little bit more evenly spread, finer detail, images, engraving, when you do photographic engraving, let's call it, onto various materials. This is perfect. It works at a slightly smaller wavelength as well. So yeah, you can use it for much finer detail applications.
Okay. How about setting the actual laser height? If you've got different thicknesses of materials, you usually have to adjust things. How does the Creality machine do that?
So normally if you're engraving, you engrave almost so that the focal point is on the top of the surface, because it's actually not going so deep. They do give you this height adjustment here. It gives you an idea of cutting thicknesses, and the adjustment of the laser, there's a couple of knobs on the side there. Move it up and down, put the laser adjusting to the height there. Fairly straightforward. Did exactly what it said on the tin.
So how about some pros and cons? What did you like about this machine?
For me, probably two major pros on this. I'd say firstly the build quality. It's a nice brushed aluminium. It looks good, it feels solid, and I think years to come this will still be in my workshop as a strong workhorse, as a cutter engraver that will do 80% of what I need it for. And probably the second one is, you can't underestimate the safety needed when you're operating lasers. I mean, these will still blind you if you look into them directly. Yeah. And this has small safety features just built in. It's the fire protection, it's using the air purge, it's got the lid, it's got the key, it's got the start stop. I mean, all things built in just to allow you to do what you actually want to do, and that is cut and engrave and whatever you might do with a typical laser engraver.
Yeah, and of course those safety features are not just there to protect the human using it; they also protect the machine itself, don't they? Yeah. For instance, you've had issues with your CO2 laser. I remember you saying you had a fire, but also the machine effectively cooked itself because the cooling wasn't on.
Absolutely.
And that's just not possible with this, is it? The features on it stop that from happening.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, I mean, I'd say for me, from what I've seen, even though I've not used the machine, I'm impressed with how you get everything together in one box. There's no additional things you need to buy, even down to the bed. There's a bed included. Often with diode lasers, you have to go and buy a separate honeycomb bed. This comes with one. So everything you get on day one allows you to use the laser straight away.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about cons? What didn't you like?
Nothing stands out that I don't like about the laser. If I compare it to what I've got in the workshop, only one downside is probably the limit of the height from the top of the bed to the bottom of the laser is around about 50 mil. So you need to your whole workpiece has to fit around that envelope. Mm-hmm. For typical engraving on MDF, it's probably absolutely fine. On bigger systems, they've got, motorized gantries that allow you to put, large objects in. It's sort of not really a con because it's not really designed for that. This is a desktop laser engraver. So, but that's my only limitation, I would say, on this.
And I'm right in thinking that if you took the bottom drawer out and you removed the slats from the bed, you could actually kind of raise it up on stilts and still engrave on top of things?
If we move that out of the way, this can be pulled out. You're absolutely right. Slats can come out. You can build it up and it effectively opens up the base to use on larger. It's a little bit of hassle, but it doesn't completely outrule.
It seems like it's all been thought about and you have the option if you want to do that, but it's day-to-day use.
Yes.
For me, I suppose my first thought on a negative is the fact that it's not Wi-Fi enabled, but like you said yourself, you don't really need it on these engravers.
Yes, correct.
So if your PC, Mac, laptop are going to be within a couple of meters of the machine anyway while it's running, why do you need Wi-Fi?
Absolutely.
And then, obviously you did have the issue with the power supply, but you're always going to get these odd issues with different machines. And I suppose the important thing was how they put it right. And they sent a new power supply, no questions asked. Sorry.
Yep, absolutely perfect. Can't complain.
Excellent. So having used this machine for what is a couple of months now, who would you say it is ideally suited for?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say that could be your first engraver, or you've already had a very cheap, low-cost engraver and you actually want to go in with something that is a little bit more long lasting. It's got a few of the feature sets that we've described built in. So either a very decent first engraver, or you've already been burnt with a cheap engraver. Now you actually want to go with something that has, let's say, a little bit more bells and whistles, but from a fairly decent brand. And probably for me also, I would say that if you have a big CO2 laser, you're not really getting that functionality, and you want something, you want to create a bit more room in your workshop, then moving to this desktop style that does 80% of what you probably are using it for, then it makes a good transition.
So who would you say this is not for? I mean, is there anybody who would want a laser engraver who shouldn't buy this engraver?
I think where, in comparison to the other CO2 engravers, stand out is they're high power, they can cut things quicker, and certainly on some of the bigger systems, you know, they're designed to put big work pieces in. So unless you're really doing high throughput processes or large items, it probably fits you quite well.
So I guess it's upper end of the hobby spectrum, or even possibly dipping into a professional use. I mean, it is called the Pro. Would you say you could use it for professional job?
I think you can do, yes, absolutely. As long as you're in that working envelope of not looking through transparent acrylic, not using it for very thick materials, then I think it works well. You can. It's a fairly decent bed size. I think your throughput can be very good.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much for testing out this machine and giving us your perspective. Remember, for the best price on this particular laser engraver, check the links in the description below. And if you want to see more videos like this one, then click over here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.